Good afternoon. Again, you are all welcome to the third presentation of our online seminar series within the scope of summer school program. I would like to thank to all of you for your participation. Today, Angelos Psilopoulos and Katerina Michalopoulou from West Attica will make their presentation. The title is Narrative Histories and Memory Assemblages, dealing with historicity as an object of design. Angelos, Katerina, the word is yours.
Thank you. So, hi everyone. As you may know already, my name is Angelos Psilopoulos. I am a lecturer at the Department of Interior Architecture in the Faculty of Applied Arts and Culture at the University of West Attica in Greece. So we're going to follow in Jose and Maria Jose's footsteps, and we're going to give the lecture in two parts, along with my colleague, Miss Katerina Michalopoulou, who's a colleague in the same department. And like, I think we're gradually going towards building up our case for online on-site meeting by building on, starting with the summer school reference theme. It's a lecture that Sergio did, the first lecture. It was about absence. And then we got a second lecture combined on design and research strategies. And so today is going to be about context and contextualization, right? We got the absence, we got the presence. Now we're going to talk about what are we talking about. So it's going to be a bit abstract. We're going to do examples, but the questions we're going to pose are questions that you are supposed to be asking when we go on site, right? So it's going to turn a bit philosophical, and it's going to take us away from well-paved paths into the realms of interpretation and the mechanics of finding what we wish to say about the objects we're going to be designing in Syringa, right? So we are going to talk about historicity. It's kind of like the historical potential of a token of a past, like an object, right? Some material substance that we are going to write histories about, right? And we are going to see how the function of memory creates not only the necessity for rebuilding a past that is no longer available to us, but it also introduces the responsibility of choosing the histories we mean to preserve. And we need to choose wisely and thoughtfully. And finally, we're going to see how these histories may become an object of design. So you may call it artistic creation, if you will, or a methodical strategy of turning an existing situation, like a ruin, into a desired one, which in our case would be a contextualized ruin, a place of experiences, so to speak. So let's start with the obvious counterparts of today's problematic. It's all about history and memory and history, right? How do these two combine? This is a painting by Peter von Hess, right? He was a German romantic painter. He was known for historic paintings, especially with themes for the Napoleonic Wars and the Greek War of Independence. And von Hess was selected in 1833 by King Ludwig I of Bavaria to accompany the young King Otto to the newly formed Kingdom of Greece, right? Otto was Bavarian. He was elected by the big powers, the great powers, to be King of Greece. And this was not a random choice, because Bavaria at the time was like the hub for neoclassicism, for academic neoclassicism, and they were like the most romantic of romantic people in the contemporary world at that time. So it made sense that they would pick the job to do it. So von Hess is accompanying King Louis to Greece, and he's going to be witnessing history in the making, and he's going to testify to it, right? So these paintings that he did depict, this painting in particular depicts Otto and his entourage being received by the crowds, the Greek Orthodox clergy and prominent political figures in front of the Theseon, on the Agora, and the towering Acropolis in the background, right? So it's a composition. If you read the description at the webpage of the Neue Pinakothek, where the painting resides now, the description says that S describes the contemporary, I'm quoting now, right? S describes the contemporary historical events in rich splendor of colors, but without allegorical apparatus, and renounces a glorification of the ruler. All in all, he's meant to be objective, right? He's depicting history and like as a testament. I was there, I saw everything, this is how it looked, right? So this is supposed to be a realistic representation of how things actually happened. The painting itself is the equivalent of a photo reportage, right? It stands as testament to the event, and therefore it acts like a token of validity beyond its representational value. That happened. It's valid. Having said all that, the painting itself was painted around 3 years after the actual events occurred, and therefore von Hess actually had to illustrate the scenes from memory, or based on gathered stories and information, as well as his very own imagination of what each part of the composition may have looked like in the first place, right? 3 years afterwards. The same applies to this painting. This is von Hess, where he depicts the arrival of young King Otto in Nafplia in 1833. And Nafplion, the city, was the acting capital of Greece until it was moved to Athens in 1834. So again, the painting relies on a recollection, followed by a representation of actual events within certain rules of pictorial composition and narrative that were quite expected for this genre of painting, right? So you can clearly see traits of a narrative, as the young king is greeted by a representative variety between regular folk, clergy, political and military figures, like one by one, you can name them if you find the figures, along with the fort of Nafplion standing in the background, and also the smoke of naval battle highlighting the military exploits that eventually granted naissance to the nation of Greece. So obviously this is not a snapshot of real events, right? It's certainly narrative. And to go one step further, like in that movie Inception, right? Here you can see a painting that depicts the royal family of Bavaria, including King Ludwig I, admiring Otto von Hess, von Hess's picture, the arrival, Peter von Hess's picture of the arrival of Otto in Nafplio on January 25, 1833. So a picture within a picture within a picture. So now we go a bit deeper into the rabbit hole, because now we see that truth, which is the point, is now mediated by narrative. So we can immediately see the distinction between physical reality. Physical reality is agnostic to what we think about her, and our recollection of it. Like something happens, doesn't care if we're standing there or not, it's going to happen anyway. But then we come in the picture and we want to revisit. We want to recollect what happened, and we want to communicate it to others and create histories about it. So this is basically one of the most fundamental human faculties of making sense of our world. And this is contextualizing the physical reality and our experiences so that we can make sense of it, share it, and create bonds around it. This is the truth This is a picture by American-Greek photographer Konstantinos Manos, who did great work as a photojournalist for the Magnum Agency. You may know the Magnum Agency for sure if you work with photography, like the best photographers in the world work for Magnum. So Manos was born in 1934 in the US, and he came from a Greek family, but he was born an American. Eventually, he traveled to the homeland of his parents during the 60s and documented his visit through a series of photographs. And these photographs turned out to be one of his greatest successes, like a portfolio that is called, the title of this body of work is called the Greek portfolio, right? So in this photograph, we see a woman in mourning, wearing black, waiting for a steamboat to take her to her greater journey of immigration to a foreign country, most likely America or Australia. So were the circumstances and actual situation of the photograph as real as they can be? Again, the rules of composition and narrative do apply. The photograph tells its own story, partly by suspending that moment to posterity, and partly by creating a line of narrative, which we tend to complement ourselves as we use our imagination to fill in the missing details of that woman's story. Who died? Why is she forced to immigrate? Which boat is she waiting for? What does she carry in her suitcase? Another picture. This one is from a movie called America, America, directed by Elias Kazan. And again, the narrative context of the movie is quite real. He represents the stories of Greek immigrants going to America, looking for a better fortune. The image itself is entirely fictional, as it is the product of cinematography. So the question is whether the story behind it strikes a chord enough to make us bond with the actual stories and circumstances of the immigrants it refers to. It's not real. These are not real immigrants. These are all actors. Maybe some of them are real people. But all in all, this is cinema. This is fictional. But the story is real. Another picture from a movie, Οι κυρίες της αυλής, translating as ladies of the court. And this evolves around a typical Athenian low-class vernacular settlement with several residences organized around a courtyard. This is a play. This is a movie transfer from a French theatrical play by Alfred Guéry called The Sixième Étage. The premises of both of the plays are the same. People are trying to escape their circumstances, but in this case, the ladies of the court stroke a much more sensitive chord in the collective memory of the Greek audience, as it depicted a very current at the time, long-lasting yearning of the lower class masses to escape their circumstances. These are typical Athenian houses. People that went to the movies related to that exact same situation. They were living in those houses, and the people inside the story felt real, very real. On the opposite side, this is a very real photograph by Fred Boissonnat, a Swiss photographer that spent 30 years of his life traveling around Greece and documenting a panorama of pre- and mid-war Greece, like from the early 1900s to the mid-30s. And this, like, again, for photographers, this is accepted as a milestone for the development of Greek photography. But at the same time, this is like a traveler's point of view. It's a bit detached. It follows in the footsteps of the 18th century travels such as Leroy, and we're going to be looking at pictures from Leroy, who visited Greece in its authentic state of affairs. but never got entirely personal with the subjects. It's a traveler's point of view. And to make it more real, here's another picture of Bossona in Crete, Omalos, at 1911. These are beautified pictures, right? Eos at the grave of Homer in 1918. The Parthenon, 1908. And this is Julien David Leroy, one of the many noblemen that left their convenient situation to travel to Greece, which at the time was very poor, and they visited the ruins. And this is an etching, right? French wanderer. And this became a trend. Many aristocrats found their way to fabled lands to see for themselves and know them beyond the images painted by literature and fiction. And in fact, this activity created a fashion for the adoration of ruins that found its way to the iconography of paintings at the time. Lots of paintings featuring ruins suddenly, because this also introduces Western audiences to the concept of authenticity, as they gradually discovered that all of the references for classicism came not from actual classical Greek statues and monuments, but their Roman counterparts, the Roman reproductions. This is authentic. But at that time, from Renaissance onward, the classical ideal, they suddenly realized that the classical ideal that they were mimicking, holding as truth, was, copies from the Roman Empire. So not only does this introduce the idea of authenticity, but we also see traits of a narrative. And we see that as Leroy presents the classical ruins as sources of a certain light that kind of stands for the values of enlightenment, right? The sun rising from the ruin you can see on the left side and kind of bathes everything in that light. So it's kind of a revelation. So to close this section for truth and representation, I will offer you 4 versions of the same subject, right? And you tell me what is true or what is not. So on the right, on the left, we've got a painting by Greek painter Yannis Tsarouchis, House with Carriage. It's watercolor on paper. And on the right, you see a photograph of the same building with years difference. 1952 is the painting, 1953 is the photograph by Henri Cartier-Bresson. Both pictures represent the same house, and both pictures were made approximately at the same time. The house itself was built at the end of the 19th century, and it is a typical example of an Athenian neoclassical house, which kind of combines this minuscule vernacular idea of building whatever we have in our disposal with whatever we have in our disposal, but now we incorporate neoclassical style, right? The 2 caryatids are the work of a sculptor called Ioannis Karakatsanis, an artist that came from Aegina, an island. And Karakatsanis owned the house, and he lived there with his family, and supposedly his wife and daughter became models for the caryats. And after his death, his family decided to sell the house, and that was like in 1906. So it came into a state of ruin when eventually in 1989, so that's like 80 years later, it was declared preserved by the Ministry of Culture, and that saved it from collapse. And 10 years later, it was renovated, and today it hosts the Association of Hellenic Olympians. So this is the house pre-renovation on the left, and on the right you have the house after the renovation. This is an actual snapshot taken by Georges Salamé, a Greek photographer. So my question to you is, which of these four representations succeed as an authentic token of the building's historical potential? Is it Cartier-Bresson's traveler's documentative kind of view? Is it Tsarouchis, who tries to bridge the folklore with the classical in his expressive painting? Is it the building's authentic decay? Or is it the building in its renovated form because it keeps existing and it's now in use? No easy answers there. In fact, like people like Magritte, ceci n'est pas un pipe. If you all know the painting, there's a painting by Magritte, and he draws a pipe, and he says, this is not a pipe. And you've got all sorts of representations of a pipe. And the question is there actually any pipe in this discussion? In the picture of the pipe, the word pipe, the picture depicting a pipe, or the word pipe, or both in combination. It's meaning within a meaning, within a meaning, within a meaning. It's all a matter of contextualization. So if you disregard our quest for the truth, and instead you realize that you are the author of context, of stories, of narratives that become true if you become related to them, then the question becomes, how does this turn into a problem of design? For the part of historicity, I would argue we need to go through on 3 steps. Recognize the context, what is the framework upon which we're building. Then secondly, recognize the potential. How does this become interesting? How does this become expressive? Which stories are bound to create an impact to whoever is visiting? And then recognize the content, recognize the story, come up with the story. And then we have to choose a medium. We have to find how we're going to make this conceptual entity a material reality. So again, 3 steps. Recognize the means. How are we going to be narrating the story? Recognize the frame drawn directly from photography, right? Or pictography, or the building. How do we frame the story? And then tell your story. Implementation. So obviously I'm not that wise. I'm basically drawing from Paul Ricoeur, who's one of the many people who spoke about memory, many others, which I can definitely tell you about. Or Maria Mira is also very versed in this that sort of theoretical approach. But I will just focus on Paul Ricoeur, who's written so many things, but basically his approach is, in part, you may call it phenomenological, like he questions human experience and he takes that as a basis of all things that develop from that. But he also, in his later years, introduces the idea of hermeneutics. How do we interpret this experience? So in his book, La Mémoire, l'Histoire, l'Oubli, it's translated in English as well, in Greek, if you want. It's 600 pages long. I don't advise you to read all through it. It's very, very difficult. But the main structure of the book is like, the first part goes like, how does memory function? And it's all about human mechanics. The second part questions like, how does history get written? Because history is a structured way of, putting down our memories into the collective consciousness, or keeping them maintaining them for posterity, making sense of them, which, like, when we come to history, it's all about utility and abuse. How do we use history, and how can one abuse history? And then he asks a third question, how can we choose to forget? Which in the case of Paul Ricoeur, and along with Ricoeur, the whole of the French people, how do we pardon ourselves for our crimes? How do we make peace with our crimes? So this threefold structure poses a threefold problem. For one thing, memory is necessarily of a memory of something that is no longer. But having been, it therefore refers to a prior reality. It is not there, absence, but still we have a recollection of it. Now, how do we revisit? We don't have a time machine to go back to the exact instance of what we remember, and we probably wouldn't have the same, the same reflection, like the same response to what happened, because it's not new anymore. This depiction of prior reality presupposes a reconstruction, which, in order to be considered as reliable, takes the form of history, of a story that we tell to ourselves and to others. And then finally, due to the inherent instability between the absence of the thing remembered and its presence in the mode of representation, then memory is subject to, I would say, interpretation, and Ricoeur would say to multiple forms of abuse, because we're writing stories, we're not offering objective nature, objective realities. These are stories, and there is an ethical stance behind it. So, to come again to my interpretation, so take it with a grain of salt, in the end, we find that it takes a thoughtful process of contextualization in order to, first, recognize the historical potential of a token, a body of evidence, a ruin, for instance, that stands testament to the past, a place, a ruin, an object of memory. Then reveal the stories you want to safeguard for posterity. You pick the stories, and then find the means to carry those stories from an existing situation to a desired situation. This is design. We have an existing situation, and then we design for it, but it's not about aesthetic pleasure, it's about telling stories. And then, in parentheses, perhaps choose to take an ethical stance. Think about the stories you're narrating. Are they, narcissistic because you want to create a beautiful object of design, and put pictures on your website, on your portfolio? Are you actually interested in the stories you want to tell? Are you digging deep enough, or you're staying on the surface? Are you looking to capitalize and bring tourists and make money? Or are you trying to reveal hidden meanings? So this is my part. Over to Katerina.
Okay. Well, any engagement we have with an old building has at its starting point the consideration of the building as a bearer of history. The reuse of a building refers to a composition of different elements, considering, first of all, its existing status so far that it is the building itself as a construction, as matter, as shape, the previous function of the building, the history of the building, events that marked his life, the uniqueness of the building, Its relationship with other buildings, both as typological similar and as a part of group of buildings and outdoor spaces, and its evolution during its life, the different phases of its life. Secondly, we have to find out the protection status of the building. That means that we have to find out the legal status that refers to how we can reuse it or perceive it as it was or change its function. Legal status that points out the importance of any of all the above specifications of the building, for example, morphological elements, typological specifications, and historical events. All the above are necessary for us to understand, experience, and feel the building as we deal with. The next stage of our study concerns our own intention to give new life to the building, our desire to combine the existing building with something new so that new building be reborn as something else. In that point, we should understand that any interference of ours, no matter how small, no matter how target is, definitely leads to a new building. It is utopian to think that we can restore the building as to its former state. The awareness of this situation, of this weakness, actually liberates us and gives us the opportunity to conceive a lot of interactive ideas. So in this stage, we have to compose our own narration. What are the stories we want to put in the new building, and in what way, in what order, these stories will be presented to us? We will try to analyze this stage by describing a very interesting rhetorical technique of antiquity, the mnemonic technique. Mnemotechnique was a rhetoric technique by which the rhetors could improve their memory and thus better memorize the lengthy speeches that they have very often had to give. Since in antiquity there was no typography, not even paper where people could easily keep notes or write their thoughts, we realize the importance of a trained memory. Mnemotechnic attracts its origin from classical Greek antiquity, the 5th century BC, and is based on the belief that by nature, through our senses, we tend to inscribe in our inner world the external perceptual stimuli as images. Moreover, Greek philosophers, for example Aristotle, claimed that optical configurations would enforce remembering. In his book on memory and recollection, he introduces the idea of reality intermediated by figures and suggests that we can easier store images than scenarios. Memory is only activated when it has an image as an object. The most effective way to remember something is to integrate it into a spatial system in order to classify it, and we can only think by images, because the way we think is similar to the way we construct geometries. So, the act of recalling, of remembering, was considered to be interrelated with the act of vision and to have a spatial analog. According to mnemotechnic, firstly, the reader must define pre-assigned locations using them as spatial foundation. These are the locus. Secondly, he must create stories or images of what he needs to remember, the imago. Once the images have been formed, they have to be placed in the locations, in locus. Thirdly, in order for the reader to control and remember the way that locations are associated with the images, he must have a visual sense of their arrangement, of their organization, ordo. So, Whenever he wishes to make a speech, a narration, he recalls the place, the locus, where he settled his stories and images, imago, and then he moves on the pre-designed route, ordo, in order to visit them. This construction therefore combines the existing space with the stories we want to tell. The designed movement creates a stitching of the stories, creating the final narration. This means that if we manage to identify our narration with place, then as long as the place exists, our narration will be alive. So after deciding the elements we would like to include in our narration and the ways we will perceive it, in other words, the positions where we will place our stories, we have to choose our means of expression. The metaphorical way of thinking is the only way we have in language and by extension in our thinking in order to refer to and process something new, something that we currently do not know. So if we want to create something new, we have to find the appropriate combination of the existing so that this combination produces new meanings. But how does this selection and combination works? For the blend of new and old elements and how they interact as to produce new narratives, we will refer to Abi Warburg's Atlas Mnemosyne. In Greek mythology, Mnemosyne is the goddess of memory and the mother of the 9 muses by her nephew Zeus. In this tradition, Mnemosyne is one of the Titans, the 12 children of the earth goddess and the sky god. The term Mnemosyne is derived from the same source as the word mnemonic, that being the Greek word mnemi, which means remembrance and memory. As we mentioned, Mnemosyne became the mother of the 9 muses, who are the muses of epic poetry, history, music and lyric poetry, love poetry, tragedy, hymns, dance, comedy, and astronomy. Warburg was a German art historian and cultural theorist. He worked on the Atlas Mnemosyne from 1925 until his death in 1929. Atlas consisted of a series of large panels, wooden boards covered with black cloth. On them, he pinned groups of visual materials, such as photographs, prints, reproductions of artworks and images of koans, celestial maps, calendars, and genealogical tables, as well as advertisement posters and stamps. Warburg collected and arranged these images to explore the interconnections and motifs in art, literature, and visual culture. He tried to explore the power of memory in shaping cultural forms and expressions throughout history. The Atlas was what we would now call transdisciplinary, putting art history in dialogue with the fields of archaeology, anthropology, psychology, and literary criticism. Warburg called his project the foundation of a new theory on a function of human visual memory. The panels of Atlas were organized in a non-linear associated manner, emphasizing the connections between the images rather than presenting a chronological or hierarchical structure. The arrangement encouraged viewers to make their own interpretations and discoveries. The Atlas Mnemosyne aimed to reveal the underlying patterns, themes, and symbols that emerge across different periods and geographical regions. Warburg believed that this recurring motifs served as the visual expressions of collective memory and cultural memory. He combined visual material that referred to all arts, to all muses, the daughters of Mnemosyne, of memory, with the aim of creating similarities and differences, with the aim of ultimately creating new associations and therefore new narrations. To understand Warburg's work, we need to relate it to the technology of his time. The new medium, photography, enabled the researcher to combine works for art next to each other, artworks for different eras, disciplines, culture, geographical locations. Before the invention of photography, this would have been impossible. Any access to this work was limited and fragmented. Even if one were lucky to have the opportunity to see one of them in an exhibition or a museum, he had to travel for days to see the next one. The new medium once again enabled the researcher to collect the work that interested him and compose them into groups. We know that he himself took photographs of the works that interested him or commissioned his friends to photograph them. These photos, together with postcards and sketches, some of them made by his wife, were his main material. The next stage of his work involved finding a line to connect them. This thread was either pre-designed or could even arise after the combination. As we already mentioned, Warburg was not interested in chronological connections. One of the key elements that his research revealed was the existence of some themes or motifs that preoccupy art throughout the ages. In the previous seminars, we saw ways of intervention in existing buildings. In the previous seminars, we attended a series of interventions where the handling of matter was crucial. In the first seminar, we attended works where matter was not necessarily related to mass. The medium we handle often leads us to different architectural choices. In the example we will present now, matter in the classical sense is absent. It is an intervention of an existing monument through projection mapping. Guided by Warburg's thought of interaction between arts as to produce new meanings, we decided to combine architecture with poetry. An ancient Greek monument combined with a modern poem. The projection mapping is designed to take place in Keramikos archaeological site, the great ancient Athenian cemetery. In particular, our work will be projected in the Street of Tombs of the retaining wall of Lysimachidis burial precinct, aimed to give new sense to the ruins with meanings that occupied modern thought and which its content are related to the former function of the monument as a burial monument. A crucial concept of our study is that of temporality as captured in art and science in early modernism. We tried to interpret and transcribe the first of the 5 parts of Mallarmé's dramatized poem Igitur, written in prose. In this first part, Le Minuit, the poet defines the place and time of the drama that is to be developed later through their non-definition. He refers to midnight, to this non-existent present instant zero, when everything may occur. From the beginning of his work, the poet has been asking us to leave any certainty about what we see or hear. We do not know for sure the person, the time, and the place of the drama. We cannot tell if we read a monologue or if there is a narrator. And it is not clear if something is happening now, before, or after. It is not clear whether the action takes place inside the room, outdoors, or in the space of consciousness. In Les Minuit, the notion of time seems to be continuously present through its verbal absence. During the 6 paragraphs of the excerpt, we attend slightly changes of reflections that imply corresponding time instants, just before midnight, the instant of midnight, and right after midnight. Mallarmé literally attempts to define time through its deconstruction and reconstruction in terms of language. In particular, some of the techniques that he develops are mixing of the grammatical time by using wrong and unexpected grammatical tenses in one period, and in this way destroying the common succession of past, future, and past, present, and future, using long periods whereby placing together many small phrases, he confuses us for the subject and object of the period and finally of the meaning. Beyond the information, the ambiguity of meaning, Mallarmé constructs an ambiguity of words by choosing to group them not according to their meaning, but according to how they sound. This idea gives precedence to the syntax rather than the referential meaning. The elements of Les Minuit synthesis that we use in our composition are space-time relation, what extends in space, durates, lasts in time, distort of the angle, expansion of space, reconstruction of space, the main angle of the space is redefined, a certain metaphor, the midnight, and use of some mechanisms, pair of words, juxtapositions, etc. The new artwork is projected in the corner of a wall. The corner is considered to be the generated element of the space, and in our work corresponds to the absolute or to the zero. Numbers are moving on the surface of the wall and define with absolute measurements the coordinates of the points that they pass through. The artwork is a projection synchronized with a music poem. When the voice refers to the midnight, the projection of shapes and lines on the corner begins. Instantly, due to the right perspective, reveals a new 3-dimensional space that will be transformed in a few seconds. After the completion of the transformation, the projection of the space measurements returns. The measurements remain until we reach the word midnight again, where a new transformation is revealed. These transformations are randomly retrieved for a storied library. So,
We can hear the sound as well.
okay. Okay, let me, well, this is the measurements. And let's go to another break of the corner. Okay. That was a little part of this artwork. So